Greetings and welcome Amash, and this is my review and critique of Paragon, which is currently in early access. After spending around a week with Paragon, I've come to realize that it makes me feel the very same emotions Dota 1 evoked back when I first tried it, eons ago. The thrill of experiencing something completely new, the utter confusion about how anything works, the aha moment of finally figuring it out, and the eternal rage of 1,000 stars at some of the more broken elements. Much like Dota 1 at that point, Paragon is currently unfinished. This isn't one of those fancy beta tests where you are essentially playing a demo. Instead, it's one where you are presented with a game whose core is complete, yet everything surrounding it is held up with a few sticks, some gum, and a whole lot of hope. What initially drew me, and I'd imagine the majority of you, to Paragon was how beautiful the trailers made it look, and for the most part, they weren't kidding. The landscape is gorgeous and showcases all of that nifty tech that comes with Unreal Engine 4, with a special mention going towards the lighting, which manages to make the whole atmosphere of Paragon oddly cheerful, despite the hordes of murderous brutes beating the ever-living daylight out of each other all over the place. The character designs, however, are a bit of a mixed bag. On one hand, they, much like the environment, are beautifully rendered and really cool to look at, with each and every hero having some feature about them that made me stop at the character selection screen to examine them further. Personally, the best thing about the character design is that all of them are presented as powerful heroes, even the female characters, which goes a long way towards making the fights in Paragon feel like a big deal. The problem here is that while the heroes might look great visually, their spells and effects leave a lot to be desired for. For me, it's not the visuals alone that make this an issue, but the disconnect between how powerful a spell is and how fancy the effects are. Take Dota 2 for example. When Invoker unleashes his iconic meteor, half of the damn screen gets covered by his gigantic meatball, an important effect when you consider that standing in its path is near certain death. Gideon, on the other hand, is capable of producing an entire meteor shower that does a lot of damage in a small area but is barely visible when you're standing in it. And it's not until you realize there's a giant space stalactite where your heart used to be that you might have stayed in there for a bit too long. As I mentioned before, Paragon is still in beta, so while these issues are excusable, I would like to see them fixed as soon as possible, because feeling like an unstoppable god wizard is half of the fun of playing MOBA games. The other half is turning your wimpy hero from the start of the match into an unstoppable minion clearing machine with 7 bows stuck to his arms, despite primarily using a spear as a weapon. In order to do so, you will need to level up and gather currency, both of which come from killing enemies or other players. If you've ever played Dota 2, you know the basics, but for everyone else, here's how it works. Each time a minion dies, they will grant you a certain amount of experience and drop a certain amount of gold. It's actually golden balls, but gold sounds better than balls, so I'll stick with that. However, if you instead land a killing blow on the enemy minion, you will not only gain both instantly, but you will also gain more of each, so last hitting is heavily encouraged. Unfortunately, Paragon doesn't like you last hitting enemy units and will try its very best to obfuscate enemy health by ramming 3 to 4 units into the same 2 centimeters of screen space. Or just by constantly shifting your target from one to another, making you miss the enemy you originally aimed for. And worst of all, by having your ranged minions do incredible amounts of damage really quickly, which means if you are a hero with slow moving projectiles, which is coincidentally all of them, you'll have to take shots way earlier than you might expect. What I'd like to see in Paragon's future is enemies that are easier to target and minion damage that is just as predictable as in Dota 2. The goal is to make last hitting not a game of chance, but rather a deeply intricate dance between two people who want to kill each other really badly but have to do some chores first. The reason you want to do all this last hitting, besides attempting to earn the Blood God's favor, is in order to acquire items, or cards as they're known in Paragon. They are pretty much the same concept as items in Dota 2 or League of Legends, with the main difference being that the cards are worse in every way imaginable. First of all, they are really boring, offering you such amazing benefits as plus damage, plus health, plus mana, and sometimes even a combination of those. There is also the occasional plus crit and plus health regen card, but nothing close to the interesting and hero-defining items you might find in Dota or League of Legends. Things get even more fun when you consider that you don't start with all the cards unlocked, you have to acquire them by buying booster packs with in-game currency. And if that wasn't bad enough, you can only bring 30 cards with you into a match. This might not sound like a big deal, after all 30 items is plenty, but the majority of those slots will be reserved for upgrade cards, of which you will need multiples. Imagine playing a Dota 2 match where you are only able to buy items from a pool of 10 you got randomly through booster packs. It's absolute madness. I can see potential in every aspect of Paragon, a real solid chance to transform what is currently clunky into something unique and special, but the card system is the most annoying, new player unfriendly and boring hero customization system I have ever seen in a MOBA game. No one wants to rely on pure, uncaring chance in order to get the cards and make their hero work, and veteran pro players definitely don't want the game making choices for them by restricting their item pool, so who is this card system really for? Once you get past the laning phase and stack up a few cards under your suit of armor, the match will finally begin for real. Ganks, i.e. hunting down enemy players, will suddenly start mattering a lot more because each dead opponent means it's that much easier to demolish their towers, and eventually their core itself. In order to do so, you will have to utilize a third-person movement and casting system that's very similar to the one found in Smite, but much like Paragon itself, a fair bit clunkier. It's hard to explain this without letting you give one of the characters a spin, but piloting them feels exactly like that. Like you're piloting a fridge on wheels rather than a person with legs. The result of this is a combat system that is designed to be fast-paced and even looks fast-paced, but is actually incredibly slow and finicky to control. Your hero feels like a slug, a fact that you will become intimately aware of when you're being chased around by 5 enemy heroes who don't seem to be happy as you are that their tower just went down. I could get used to that alone, but your auto attacks are also lethargic, especially on some of the ranged characters where it can take up to 0.5 seconds before the projectile even launches, and then around 1 to 2 seconds until it finally connects. All of this makes your auto attacks feel unsatisfying to use and your hero difficult to maneuver, as if they are stuck in mud. The good news is that this isn't a difficult issue to fix. Simply speeding up some of the animations and adjusting movement speed would result in a much more exciting game, both to possible spectators and most importantly to the players themselves. More speed also means there's more ways to dodge spells, which all require aiming, so the potential skill ceiling of Paragon would also go up, which is almost always a good thing. However, and I unfortunately have to use this phrase once again, while the skills feel good to cast and require a decent amount of skill to master, almost all of them are next to worthless when it comes to either damage or crowd control. What would you prefer, a single target stun that has a wind-up time and requires you to accurately hit the enemy, or Gideon, the mage I mentioned earlier, teleporting directly into the middle of combat and unleashing the equivalent of a supernova on the enemy team while also sucking them towards the center of the blast, to ensure that no one escapes without a tan? You would think that overpowered ultimate abilities would make the pace of Paragon faster, but given that almost every spell besides those does barely any damage or is unwieldy to use, fights tend to completely revolve around the cooldown of your ultis. There is no poking, no deception or preparation. Everyone simply waits till one guy messes up and then all hell breaks loose as you now have 10 players rapidly mashing the R key, hoping to obliterate the enemy team before ending up on the wrong side of a meteor themselves. Out of all the problems I mentioned so far, this is the most excusable one, as the balance in a MOBA game is next to impossible, let alone when it's one of the earliest versions available. Excusable or not, I would like to see the power level of standard abilities increased, while the game-winning ultimates should either receive a drawback or be toned down entirely. It's not very exciting to see fights end within seconds, and it tends to demoralize teams which then reach for the surrender button the first time they get wiped, which, let's face it, is not the most exciting way of ending a match. Paragon currently exists in a limbo. It has some excellent elements that make me excited to keep playing it, such as character design and skill-based casting, but also enough annoyances that after each death I take 30 seconds to reconsider whether I'm actually having fun or not. The underlying systems and mechanics have genuine potential to create a unique and thrilling MOBA brawler hybrid, but are currently so rough that it's very hard to see past the imperfections. While I'm not sure I can recommend you Paragon in this early of a state, I will say that it's well worth keeping an eye out for, as many things are bound to be changed in the coming months. That is it as far as the review is concerned, but if you would like to check out a beginner's guide for Paragon, I will have one up in a day or two, so do stick around. And finally, thank you guys for listening, and if you enjoyed this, or even if you didn't, please let me know, and if you would like to see more, you can either subscribe here, or you can check out the website link down below. That one tends to be updated more frequently. With all of that said, I hope you guys have a nice day, and I will see you soon. See ya!